Hello and welcome. This podcast is the second of two parts discussing the recent process for appointing the USA women's head coach for the NORCA Championship and my assessment that the process was questionable and was a major factor in the IHF decision to not award the USA women a wild card for the 2025 World Championships. The first part addressed the tight turnaround between firing the former coach and selecting a new one before the competition, as well as having a committee as the decision authority for the coaching selection. This part will address the qualification criteria, the composition of the committee, the lack of transparency, and the impact of the USA women not receiving a wild card. Now let's take a look at the selection criteria. For the most part, I don't have issue with the criteria as written, but I do have some concern with the criteria being designated as required or preferred. The first three required criteria are somewhat boilerplate, but the last one listed, availability and commitment to full participation in the championship and pre-event preparation activities, might unnecessarily limit the pool of candidates, especially if one also factors in the tight timeline due to firing the coach at the last minute. I could also argue that state tryouts might not be very important, or as important as we think they might be, with many of the athletes in our existing talent pool being based overseas. These listed preferred criteria are also okay, although one might argue that distinguishing between required and preferred might effectively mean that the preferred requirements are less important. And this is the crux of my concerns with the selection criteria. It appears that experience was de emphasized, that experience was just nice to have. In particular, I know that there was at least one very experienced, highly regarded coach that applied for the position who was never interviewed or even contacted. This coach even has a world championship title on their resume. By contrast, I don't think Sarah Gaskin has coached handball at any level other than as sort of a player coach at low level club competitions in the US. This doesn't mean she can't coach or become a great coach, just that it's a pretty big question mark. I think there are a few instances where players have made the transition from player to coach instantaneously, but generally it's been at the club level prior to national team responsibilities. Now let's take a look at who was actually on the selection committee and how they were selected to be on the selection committee. Since I'm pretty sure it was an ad hoc committee under the USA Team Handball bylaws, 33% of the committee had to be chosen by the Athletes Advisory Council. The AAC selected two former athletes, Jennifer Fithian and Ashley Van Ryn. Fithian was also a recent board member, and yes, in case you were wondering, she was there on the board during the sequence of events that took place last year. The other three committee members were selected by CEO Mike King and then at some point approved by the board of directors. John Silva is the founder of one of our top collegiate clubs at North Carolina. Dina Karaman is the president of Boston Team Handball and a former women's national team goalkeeper. And I still don't know who the wheelchair person is. Just know that they are a women's wheelchair coach. It's my opinion that the composition of this committee was very favorable to the eventual selectee, Sarah Gaskin. I say this because 3/5, a working majority, were former teammates. And then having a wheelchair representative was also beneficial since Gaskin had very recently been the team leader for our brand new wheelchair national team. I have no idea who this committee member is, but with Gaskin and other members of the Auburn community having done great work getting that program started, one could surmise that aspect of her resume would look pretty good to a wheelchair person. So maybe 4 of the 5 committee members were predisposed to support a particular candidate. I'd like to emphasize that my concern is not with the individuals on the committee. I have no reason to think they did anything other than the job that was asked of them. No, my concern is with the overall composition of the committee. It's also my opinion that such a favorable composition didn't happen by accident. I guess it's possible some individual good people were considered and then selected with no thought whatsoever as to what their collective input to the process might be. Okay, sure. And the U.S. Handball Union was only conceived as a way to help USA Team Handball. Yeah, right. The analogy here is jury selection and how it can be more important than the actual trial. I've been called for jury duty a couple of times, and it's certainly interesting to see that process play out with the questionnaires and the questions the lawyers asked to weed out prospective jurists. Both sides are looking for biases that might hurt their clients' chances. This, however, wasn't a jury, but a committee selection with just one guy picking three of the committee members. To be reviewed and approved by the board, but I wonder how much thought the board put into their approval. Individually, they are good people. It's only in the context of the overall committee composition that oversight questions might come to bear. Yeah, based on everything that has happened in the past year, one would have to be pretty naive to believe that the composition of the committee was an accident. I'm not sure why Mike King wanted to pave the way for Sarah Gaskin, but in my opinion, that's exactly what happened. I'll now state something that is fairly obvious. Hiring a coach with no coaching experience when at least one very highly experienced coach is not even considered is very bad optics. My choice of the words very bad optics is very intentional here. Saying bad optics, or essentially saying this looks bad, is significantly different than saying in a no hold barred way it was a bad selection. I could make a case for a more experienced case, and I could make a case for Sarah Gaskin's selection. It would involve a much longer discussion and a lot of nuance related to the timing and the need for a stateside based coach. For the record, I think it would be some strained reasoning, and for a number of reasons, I would seek more experience, but a case could be made. But that's not the point I'm making here. No, the point I'm making is that in the broader handball world, and in particular, when one thinks of the IHF Council or anyone who might influence that council, hiring someone with no handball coaching experience is very hard to explain, and even harder to explain if another applicant has a world championship title on their resume. Now I'll go on a bit of a tangent with reality that should concern everyone in our small community. We need more women coaching handball in the U.S. I think the number of women coaching handball at any level in the U.S. can be counted on one hand. And yes, in general, we don't have a lot of women playing handball, period, but this is ridiculous. Perhaps nothing brings this home more than the Handball Futures Festival effort, having 4 male coaches for 4 female regional teams. And my understanding is that not a single woman even applied for one of those 4 coaching jobs. I know the 4 coaches that were selected. They are good coaches, and men can coach women athletes. But this is bad optics. We need to take steps to facilitate and encourage more women to step up and become coaches. Now I'll highlight what really gets my dander up, and that has been the lack of transparency surrounding this whole process. On the 6th of March, the day after Sarah Gaskin was hired, I sent CEO Mike King the first of several emails requesting the names of who was on the selection committee and how they got selected for the selection committee. I thought this was a pretty perfunctory request. After all, the selection procedures even indicate that those committee members' names would be published in the procedures. Instead, I got zero response, not even an acknowledgement. I know people are busy. I don't like to pester people with lots of emails for information requests. But this was a very legit question, and it was totally ignored. And the website still has not been updated. Just do what your own procedures tell you to do, and you won't be bothered. On the 6th of April, at the College National Championships, I was able to have a brief conversation with Mike King about the coaching process. It was a good conversation, and it cleared up many of my questions. But not all of my questions, and 10 days later, I sent another email asking for the names and clarification as how the non-AAC members were selected for the committee. I thought that after our good conversation that my simple questions would be answered. I thought wrong. And so then we have the interview that I played on the previous podcast that took place at the Club National Championships. Again, just do what your own procedures tell you to do. So it's my opinion that not posting the names of the committee members is a cavalier disregard for basic transparency. It's just wrong, plain and simple. I'd like to think that there is near universal agreement with this opinion. Even people who hate my guts for whatever reasons are saying to themselves, well, Ryan's got a point here. So it naturally begs the question, why? And it has me scratching my head. Here are some possibilities. Perhaps the CEO doesn't want the composition of the committee to be common knowledge. The old standby. John Ryan is the only person who cares. Just ignore him, and maybe he'll go away. Or just make it harder for him to get the info. There's some logic with all those hypotheticals, and over time I've learned my lesson. Yes, when all the shenanigans took place last year, avoiding basic transparency was a very effective strategy. I actually believe people telling me that things were just a bit messy, and I assumed that the board was collectively working through whatever issues needed to be addressed. I said to myself, don't be the bitter old man complaining about everything. But as some of us now know, it was more than just a little messy, and all those independent board members weren't resigning because they didn't know how to play in the sandbox. And sort of the same thing has happened this time around as well. You might notice that in my interview, I asked about the two former national team members. Turns out that it was actually three former national team members, a working majority. Yes, when I got the actual name of the Boston team handball representative, Dina Carmen, a Google search reminded me that she was also on the national team several years ago. I had forgotten that, and yes, that's very relevant. I still don't know the name of the wheelchair rep, but I'm wondering what might come up after a Google search. I should also say that the wheelchair connection wasn't entirely obvious to me at first. But then I listened to an interview Sarah Gaskin did highlighting the success of the new wheelchair program. Again, commendable work. But if one puts two and two together, that's a very advantageous committee selection for her. All this suggests the lack of transparency was much more than a workflow problem. Now I'm going to lay out some information and let you speculate on what it might mean. I think many of you have seen this slide before, which depicts the 3-2 vote that removed Martin Brannick from the CEO position and immediately replaced him with Mike King. The green circle depicting two of those three votes include the former athlete reps on the board of directors, Mark Ortega and Jennifer Fithian. It goes without saying that with a narrow 3-2 deciding vote, that Mike King owes his current job to their votes. Mark Ortega has made it no secret of his goal of becoming a national team coach one day, and he has a fairly extensive coaching resume. My understanding is that he applied for the women's coaching job but was not interviewed. Jennifer Fithian was one of the two members of the coach selection committee. She was chosen by the Athletes Advisory Council. I'll let you use your own speculation as to what the optics of this pivotal vote last year meant to the hiring process this year. I will say this, however, I think this is another instance where the optics don't look very good. Okay, so why does all this matter? It's not like we were going to win the Norca Championship regardless of who was coaching. Well, it matters in the context of a wild card for the World Championships. In 2018, the IHF Council awarded both the USA men and women wild cards for the 2025 and 2027 World Championships. The logic being that it would help our national teams to prepare for the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. This award, however, did come with an escape clause, which said provided that the U.S. national teams have reached a certain performance level. And since that performance level is not specified, it really can justify about any performance level. Since that award back in 2018, all the way to March of this year, the fact that our national teams had wild cards for the 2025 and 2027 World Championships became part of the discourse. And I say fact because that's what everyone assumed. I, for one, certainly never heard it being couched as a big maybe. And I'm arguably the most notable negative Nelly in U.S. team handball. And I thought it was a given. And that's because it's a logical assumption. Teams like the U.S. need all the help they can get when they host an Olympics. And it's also very aligned with the IHF's plans to develop the U.S. market. Further making it seem a given was the IHF's expansion of the World Championships from 24 to 32 teams in 2021. As everyone has seen, this expansion has provided a lot of space for some pretty weak teams to participate in this competition. My comfort level, however, came crashing down on 31 March 2025 when the IHF posted a seemingly innocent article on China being awarded a wild card for the 2025 World Championships. The article neglected to mention the U.S. women, and that was the first inkling for me and many others that the USA wild card was in doubt. It's because of this timing and other factors that I think the poor handling of the USA women's coaching situation ultimately led to the IHF decision to not award the USA a wild card. The timing for sure is in alignment. Sarah Gaskin was hired on March 5th, and the IHF Council met on 27 March. I also might ask Mike King during our conversation in April at the College National Championships as to whether the timing of the coaching change had been directly related to any discussion with the IHF regarding the possibility of losing the wild card. Because if that had been true, it would have been pretty good justification for the poor timing of the coaching change. He indicated that while the IHF had expressed concern with the performance of the U.S. women's team, there had been no discussion regarding the U.S. not being awarded a wild card. My understanding is that the IHF Council is also aware of many of the elements I've outlined, including the coach with a world championship title on their resume not being interviewed or contacted. Overall, it is my opinion that a combination of poor on-court performance and the poor handling of the U.S. coaching situation directly led directly led to the IHF decision to not award a wild card. In simple terms, keep Coach Borsis, I think we get a wild card. Have a more structured transition with better timing, I think we get a wild card. Select more experienced coach, I think we get a wild card. But with the transition that occurred, I think the IHF chose to send USA Team Handball a message. That's my opinion based on the information I have gathered. You know, anyone who's ever managed anything knows that mistakes are made, that plans can go awry. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback from the sidelines. I don't want to nitpick things, but man, this is a devastating blow to USA Team Handball. And I get the sense that many people don't realize this. Here are some reasons as to why it's so devastating. First off, I can say from personal experience, there's nothing quite like training and playing in a world championship environment. And almost all of it is paid for by the IHF. It also would have provided a great near term focus for the women's program. Essentially, it could have been the start of a concentrated 3-year effort to field a competitive side in 2028. And very importantly, it could have been a unique benchmarking opportunity to see just exactly where we stand and how far we have to go against a variety of different opponents. Finally, it's a lost marketing opportunity, both for the recruitment of athletes and sponsor acquisition. Yes, I know we've been saying that for years, but as we draw closer to the 2028 Olympics, it will soon become reality. Here's who we would have played. Croatia took our wild card spot. And a quick side note, don't confuse the Croatian women's program with the storied history of the Croatian men's program. I don't know the reason or the dynamics involved, but the Croatian women have never been very successful. If they weren't going to the World Championships, it would not have created much of an outcry. Certainly nothing in comparison to a men's World Championship without Croatia. But getting back to the who we would have played, you can see the 3 teams that we would have played in the preliminary round: Denmark, Romania, and Japan. Those would have all been big losses. But it also would have been important for benchmarking, particularly Japan, as they are certainly a potential Asian uh, qualifier for the 2028 Olympics. After the preliminary round, we would then likely have played Iran, Uruguay, and Paraguay in the President's Cup. Based on recent U.S. performance, on paper, those would also be 3 losses. But I like to think that with the right athletes and the right coaching, we could do better than expected and show the IHF that progress is on the way. But we will not have that opportunity. So let's take stock of where we are. On the men's side, Robert Hedden has departed, and our men's program has come a long ways in 5 years under his leadership. Why, I could even make the case that he's the best coach we've ever had. Relax, old timers. I'm not saying he is the best ever, just saying I can make a solid case. Part of that success was the good fortune of talent, but just part of the case, because he took that good fortune and pretty much maximized what could be done with it. I was a bit concerned that maybe the U.S. men have peaked, but I could rest assured that the men's program was in good hands. But now he's left on acrimonious terms, and while his compensation was an issue, it wasn't the old issue. We need to find another coach. On the women's side, I thought a change was overdue and that we needed to come up with a master plan with the goal of fielding a competitive team in Los Angeles, and then hire the right coach to implement that plan. Instead, for some reason, we had a hasty transition with no real plan in place, disruptive, and handled poorly enough to lose a wild card. Now, just 3 years out from the Olympics, we need a head coach for both the men's and women's teams. These are the second and third most important hiring decisions for the Olympic quad. And based on what's taken place the past few months, I don't have a warm fuzzy about these hires. I'm pretty concerned, actually. If you've watched the video this far, hopefully you're concerned now too. I know that I'm in somewhat of a unique position. I'm not trying to make a national team, coach a national team, be an international referee, or any of the other lofty goals that people in our small community have. Lord knows I'm not going to ever get hired for any position within RINGB. That reality makes it a lot easier for me to speak out. But hopefully, there's someone you trust on the board of directors that you can speak to let them know that you are concerned and ask them to be a little bit more diligent, just a bit more curious and questioning as to plans going forward. Because it's pretty clear to me that more diligent oversight is needed with all the big decisions upcoming in the next 3 years. That about wraps it up. The USA Handball Talk podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. So like and subscribe to get the latest episode. Thanks for listening.